Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about movies a little bit, but also of course about books because the Oscars are coming up, and if you are anything like me, you love the Oscars. The Oscars are my Super Bowl. I watch them, I mark them on my calendar, I make a point to go see the shorts. I keep very close tabs on them because I love movies and especially good ones. So today what I'm going to do is a recommended reading list to accompany the Oscar nominees. I'm doing just Best Picture only because otherwise I would be here all night, and I frankly don't have enough recommendations to fulfill every movie that is nominated for an Oscar. So with that, I am going to start. First movie is Jojo Rabbit. If you have not seen this movie, it is about a young boy in Nazi Germany who loves Hitler. Hitler is his best friend, his imaginary friend, and so he's been indoctrinated into this racism of hating Jewish people. And then one day he finds a girl hiding in their attic, I guess, and she's obviously Jewish, and he has to be confronted by his own hatred and racism. And it's a great movie. I strongly recommend it if you have not seen it, but it's at times heart-wrenching and heartwarming, and it's really hard to do even slightly comedic movies about World War II. So this one hits on a bunch of different levels that I appreciate. And so the recommendation that I have as companion recommended reading for Jojo Rabbit is a book about something very different. This is called The Witchfinder's Sister. This is written by Beth Underdown. This was written by a British author, and this one, unfortunately, is not comedic, but it does have ideas of undermining people who are trying to hunt people down and essentially kill them. So this is about a very religious man. His name is Matthew. He's actually based on a real person. So this is historical fiction. And so in 1645, there were witch hunts in England. And so this man hunted down over 100 women and put them to death. Which is awful. And so this is a story about his sister who becomes unexpectedly widowed, and she's still fairly young. And back then, a single woman could not live on her own. So she went to live with her brother, Matthew, who was the witch hunter, and she proceeds to accompany him on these little journeys to meet women and find out if they were witches. And so she does her best to kind of toe the line between not getting a finger pointed at her, but also helping women to not be targeted themselves. So she's sort of undermining her brother in his quest to murder a bunch of innocent women. This was a really interesting book. I liked it. It was a little tough to read at times just because it's so horrific, but I thought it was really well done, and it was about a period of time that I really didn't know anything about. So that's The Witchfinder's Sister, companion reading for Jojo Rabbit. Next is Little Women, and if you have not seen Little Women or know the story of Little Women, you know what? There's a book. I thought about going the easy route and just recommending that you read Little Women, but that seemed like kind of a cop-out. And there's so many other interesting books about women through the ages that I think could be interesting companion pieces to the film. So I have two book recommendations. The first one is called Bachelor Girl, 100 Years of Breaking the Rules, A Social History of Living Single. This is written by Betty Israel, and I read this several years back. I don't have the physical copy with me right now, but it was a great look at women being single throughout the ages and how difficult it was. Until the Industrial Revolution, there weren't really even jobs, and then when there were, they were factory jobs and lots of abuses and so on and so forth. So that's a great book. if you haven't seen this version of Little Women, there is an emphasis on how women aren't really able to earn their own money. So things like marriage and having children is really an economic decision rather than a love decision, the way we like to think of it today. So I feel like the earning power of women is really an important piece of the movie that makes it different from other versions of the movie. The other one is one that I do have the physical copy of. This is called Radium Girls by Kate Moore. And this was a story about women in the early 20th century who they painted clock faces onto timepieces. Back then, they didn't have all the fancy glow-in-the-dark technology that we had, and so they used radium to do it. They did not know that radium was radioactive and as dangerous as it is, but it glowed in the dark. So these women would get these very teeny tiny little brushes, and they would paint the clock faces on them. And this is a really fascinating story about a bunch of women who, they were just doing their jobs and trying to earn a living and be productive members of society. And this radioactive chemical, essentially, guess what happens? So this was about them kind of trying to fight back, fight for their rights, and so on. And this was a really fascinating book about women banding together, helping one another, and trying to change an industry that really was writing them off, which is basically the industry of work. So I would highly recommend this book. It was really, really good, and I think it would be great companion reading for Little Women. Next up, I have the recommendation for Ford versus Ferrari. If you have not seen this movie, it is about how the Ford Corporation decided that they wanted to win the Le Mans car race in France, and Ferrari had won it for years and years and years. And so everybody thought it was insane. It's very much an underdog story. No one thought that they would win. Apparently the Le Mans race is 24 hours long, so it really demands a lot of both the car and the drivers. They use more than one driver, apparently. And so it's an underdog story, the David and Goliath story. It's, the triumph of the American spirit kind of story. It's a good movie. It's worth seeing. I don't think that it's going to win Best Picture, but you never know. I've been wrong in the past. So anyway, I actually, in the spirit of competition, have 2 books to recommend. The first is called Bones, Brothers, Horses, Cartels, and the Borderland Dream. This is written by Joe Tome. And the other one is called Bloodlines, the true story of a drug cartel, the FBI, and a battle for the horse racing dynasty, written by Melissa Bosque. These books are both very good, and they are about the same thing, like literally about the same people, same horses, same situation, same everything, but they are actually very different books. And I can let you decide which one is better when you read it. It can be your own little Ford versus Ferrari situation. But I thought, Ford, Mustang, horses, racing, great companion reads. But these were both fantastic books. I believe that this one, Bloodlines, has actually been optioned to be a TV series. So that should be really cool to see that when it comes out. But yeah, so this is my Ford versus Ferrari recommendation, is these 2 books. Next is my recommendation for Marriage Story. This is a movie starring Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, and it is essentially about 2 people who are in the process of getting a divorce, which it's ironically titled Marriage Story. So it's really interesting to see them break down and go through the whole process, and divorce lawyers and so on and so forth. It's a good movie. Adam Driver is fantastic in it. So is Scarlett, but Adam Driver really kind of brings it home in this particular case. So the book that I would recommend to go with that is called Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, which is written by Ada Calhoun. This is actually a book of essays. And this is a book about how difficult marriage is. It's a really interesting book. I am not married, so I wouldn't know if what she says is legit, but I can imagine that having to have a partnership with someone and every day, like, get along and live together and do the whole thing, it's not easy, I can imagine. So, and she does say that someone, I think it was a grandmother or an aunt or some relative of hers, gave her advice when she got married that said, the way you stay married is simple, you don't get divorced, which is, I guess, good advice. Like, the best way to run a marathon is to not stop running, or the best way to not die is keep living. It's fantastic advice. I mean, it works. You can't really argue against it. As long as I'm living, I can't be dying. Anyway, but there's some really cute stories, little essays in here from her life. My one complaint about this book is that there are times that in the book it feels like she's saying, well, at least I'm not single, which I take a little bit of issue with. There are many worse things than being single. Trust me. But this is still a good book, quick read. Marriage Story and Wedding Toast I'll Never Give. The next movie is The Irishman. This is the 3-hour epic directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, all those guys that were in all of his other gangster movies every other time that he made one. So Irishman, I feel like, is a bit of a rehash of the same stuff, but without someone saying, maybe we should make this a series, or maybe we should make this 2 movies, or maybe we should just not make this. I don't know. Anyway, as you can see, it's not my pick for Best Picture, but the book that I am picking is Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI. This book is actually about the Osage tribe in Oklahoma, and how at one point they were the richest people in the entire country because their reservation was situated over this giant oil field. And so, because people are terrible, basically these people were systematically killed, taken advantage of, and so forth to get their money. And it was a conspiracy between the government and politicians and other landowners and business owners and so on and so forth to get their money. And I think it's interesting that this is how the FBI was born. And since The Irishman is about the mafia and the FBI is always watching the mafia, I figured the birth of the FBI is the reason that we have people to watch mafiosos. But also, the other reason is because this book has been optioned by Martin Scorsese to make, I guess, a movie out of. I'm not sure if it's a movie or a series. I'm guessing since it's Scorsese, it will be a movie. Hopefully it will not be 3 hours long. It will be shorter. But this book is fantastic. I strongly recommend it. Great companion reading for The Irishman. The next one is Joker, and it seems like the obvious choice would be go read a comic book, but I don't read comic books. I'm not particularly interested in comic books. I'll read one sometimes, but it's not my bread and butter by any means, and I am not an expert in comic books, so I will not be making recommendations about comic books to read, since I don't know what I'm talking about. But Joker, I think I have a very good suggestion of companion reading for that, and that is The Comic Toolbox by John Vorhaus, which this book is actually a very good how-to of comedy. People are always wishing they could be funnier, more entertaining, and the little subtitle says how to be funny even if you are not. And I think that if the Joker character had had this book, so many people would still be alive in that world. So he really could have used this book. Maybe you can too. Comedy saves lives. All right, so Comic Toolbox, John Vorhaus, go get it. The next movie is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which everybody seems to love. And okay, sure, whatever. It's not my pick, but y'all just do you, okay? But this one is a book called Hollywood Escapes. And this is a great book of all sorts of places in California, of places that have been in movies that you can go visit. There's the Xanadu from Citizen Kane, which is in San Diego. In LA, obviously, there are tons of places. Even the chapel from Kill Bill is in this book. So you can plan your next road trip to go see all the Hollywood escapes, where you can see the great outdoors Hollywood style. And I think I love the cover of this book. It really calls to me as very pseudo Once Upon a Time in Hollywood-esque. And I think that idea of that nostalgia of going back to a time that was different than now is part of what this book entails, going and reliving this nostalgia of the movies. And that's essentially what Tarantino is doing in pretty much every movie he's ever made, is trying to relive some former time of movies that he has romanticized, including its racism and misogyny, so that everyone will think that that's normal. But this, I think, is a cool book, and there's some pictures in here and the whole thing, and there's maps even, so you can plan your little road trips. And this is a great book. So, companion reading, plan your next vacation with Hollywood Escapes by Harry Medved and Bruce Akiyama. So we're getting there. We're almost there. I've got 2 left. And these, I think, are the front runners to win the Best Picture. So we'll see how it goes. The first one is 1917, which, if you have not seen it, it is about these 2 guys, and one of them has a brother in another regiment, and they have basically an overnight to get a message over to the other regiment to stop them from going into battle, because it's a trap, it's an ambush. And so they have to get there in order to save this soldier's brother, but also all of the other thousands of men who are going to die in battle if they don't get there on time. So this takes place during World War I and is shot in such a way that it looks like it's one continuous shot, which is really amazing and very intense. It's a great movie, and you should definitely go see it. Go see it in the theater on the biggest screen you can find, because it is quite an experience. And so for something that is a little bit different but sort of related is The Spy by Paul Swallow. This is, first of all, what a gorgeous cover. Like, oh my God. Beautiful. That's actually the reason I bought this book, was because the cover was so gorgeous, and I wish that it was socially acceptable to wear headdresses like this on a regular basis. But this is a short little book, very easy to, I read this in an afternoon, essentially. And this is a book that's kind of a sort of fictional retelling of the Mata Hari, who was put to death as a spy during World War I. It's a really interesting story. It's very beautiful, very lyrical, very sad. She seems like she's been very misunderstood in the frame of history, and this is a very kind of sensitive telling of her as a person and as a woman. And so this is kind of companion reading to 1917, and, well, the fact that it was the same war, obviously, but also 1917 has all men in it. There's 7 minutes in the film where there's a woman in it, but the rest is all dudes, guns, the whole thing. And this is basically all her. So this is kind of the other side of the war and the role that they played, for better or for worse. So, and this book is just so beautifully written. I highly recommend this book. Yeah, great companion reading for 1917. Last but certainly not least is Parasite, which, if you have not seen, is also just incredible storytelling. And it is a Korean film. There's all these things going around about how it's the first Korean film to ever be nominated, and I'm not quite clear if it's ever to be nominated for anything or just for Best Picture. Korean films are really pretty amazing. If you have not seen Korean films, I strongly suggest that you go find some, because Korea has an amazing filmmaking industry that is very sophisticated, and they make so many good films. The movie is about basically a family of grifters who weasel their way into the lives of a wealthy family and kind of just sponge off of them for a while. You know, one's the chauffeur, one's the maid, one's the tutor. Like, so they get jobs, but they're really kind of faking it. They're not really any of those things. But it's really an interesting film that touches on ideas of class, and it touches on ideas of socioeconomic status and generational differences and the haves and have-nots and people who's taking advantage of who and so on and so forth. And it's just so well done. It's at times funny and then thrilling and then gross and then funny again. Like, it just goes all the way around. This filmmaker, he directed Snowpiercer, which is also about class differences, and he directed Oakjaw, I believe. He's a fantastic director, and so check out his movies. You won't regret it. To go with that, my recommendation is a book called Little Fires Everywhere. This is written by Celeste Ng, and this was such a great book. It was kind of a slow burn, much like Parasite, where it doesn't really reach out and grab you by the throat. It's like a snake that just kind of winds around you and then just squeezes gradually until you get to the end. And it's like, whoo, oh my goodness. This book was so fantastically written and just so atmospherically beautiful. This is about a woman and her daughter who come to this town in Ohio, I think it was, and the town is very white bread, very kind of suburban, where almost kind of Stepford Wife-ish, where everybody has their little house and their 2.4 children, and they live these perfect lives. And this woman comes in with her daughter, and she does not fit in. She is obviously of a different kind of socioeconomic class. She is more of a, she's not a drifter per se, but she's lived a very nomadic lifestyle, and she doesn't really fit into the ethnic fabric of this town either. So she and her daughter are other, but they become entwined with this family who has these 4 kids, and as everybody gets closer to one another and learn more about each other, it just ramps up the drama, and things just go haywire in ways that you would not have ever expected. And this book is being made into a TV series by Reese Witherspoon's production company, so expect to see this. I think Reese Witherspoon is actually going to be in the series, and I'm not sure who else. I think maybe Kerry Washington is going to play the single mom, so that's going to be pretty awesome, I think. But this book is very much like Parasite in that 2 families intertwine and they affect each other in ways that you couldn't expect. It really sneaks up on you. The storytelling is just superb where you can't see it coming. And so this would be great companion reading for Parasite. So those are my recommendations for if you would like to read a few things before you sit down at the Oscars with your little check marks and have your little pool, and hopefully one of the good films will win that deserve to, and hopefully all of these books will entertain you. And that's it. See you next time.